Hello dear students, today we shall be continuing our discussion about the colonial loot. Up till now we saw the various trade practices of the British and the East India Company that caused the deindustrialization of India and also the reversal of trade in the country. India, which was a major exporter of finished product, had become a exporter of raw material and an importer of finished products. So via these pilfering policies used by the East India Company and the British, the economy of India was decimated. Now let us see how the Britishers managed to destroy agriculture of India. Pre-British rule, pre-colonization, India had surplus amount of agricultural produce. Each province, each region had huge godowns that would store the surplus. There were a lot of variety of food grains present in India. See, each food grain, let's say rice. Rice that we see today is we see only one type of rice, whereas pre-colonization there were various varieties, various species. Within the same species there were different types of rice. Now what British activities did was they caused the death of various strains of these food grains. See, each, say there is a type of rice called as X. Now there is a type of rice called Y, there is type of rice called as Z. Each rice, each strand of rice had different mode of cultivation. Today rice is grown on a still water bed, where the land is made to hold water and plants, rice saplings have been planted. But pre-colonization, there were stands of rice that could grow without floating water. That means directly by pouring water, there were some stands of rice which could have grown. Not only rice, various other food grains such as wheat, barley, etc. had different strains, because since the geographical extent of India is so large, therefore that enabled the climatic conditions that vary along the Indian landmass, this led to the various genetic mutations within the plants. So therefore, for cultivating one food grain, there were multiple types of cultivations. Now why is this important? The more the variety of a species, the more strong it is when we take into consideration the climate change. These varieties of plants are more resistant to climate change. If one dies out, we can have the other two up for cultivation. So before colonization, India, it was a surplus scenario, and also there were various strains within the same food grain, and these strains were cultivated using various different methodologies, and the major food production that occurred was of food grains. The major agricultural practices that took part was of the food grains in nature. Now what happened post colonization was, first thing that the Britishers did was the commercialization of land. Pre-colonial era, the piece of land always belonged to the king or the ruler. It was the king that had given the land in a type of a lease to the farmers or the agriculturists to cultivate and produce their agricultural output. But what Britishers did was they began demarcating pieces of land and they started selling pieces of land in the market. Now, why did Britishers follow this policy? It is because the agriculturists were not providing much agricultural output for the Britishers. Therefore, they converted huge pieces of land into small pieces of land and they sold them off to the highest bidder. Now, this meant that the Britishers were making money by the sale of the land. This was the first step taken by the Britishers. Then second one was, prior to colonization, the taxes were paid in kind. In the sense, let's say farmer X is responsible for cultivation of this region, and every year this person produces, let's say, 10 bags of wheat. Prior to the East India Company and British colonization, this person X had to pay 1/4 or sometimes 1/6 of the total produce. That means if the total agricultural output was 10 bags, then 6 bags or 4 bags would have been 4 bags of wheat would go to the government, and the rest of the produce would be left with the agriculturist. Now, in this scenario, let's say this person is left with 4 bags of wheat. Now, what this person would do is they would use one bag as a buffer, because to grow in the next cropping season, these food grains would be used as seeds for the upcoming cultivations to occur. And the rest three, one bag would be used for sustenance, that is their own consumption, and the rest 2 bags were sold in the market for money. This is how the farming or the agriculture used to take place. Firstly, tax would be paid in kind. That means whatever the agricultural produce has been produced, it would be given to the government, and one part of that agricultural produce would be kept as a store for the use of the next cultivating time, and another portion would be kept for sustenance. That means for the self consumption of the farmer, and the rest bags were sold for money. So this is a general idea of how agriculture practices took place pre-colonization. What happened post-colonization was, Britishers or the East India Company made the taxation in cash only. See, the previous kings used to buy food grains for a buffer, to maintain a buffer stock, so as to reimburse the public when case of harsh climatic conditions or droughts. But East India Company and the Britishers were not concerned with the well-being of the population. Their objective is only money. So what they did was, all the regions, all the agricultural fields under their possession had to pay their taxes in cash. So now what problem arose from this was, say 10 bags produced, say the person produced 10 bags of wheat, and let's say the person got 100 rupees by selling it in the market, because the Britishers will not accept the agricultural produce as tax. They need money. So what they did was they had to sell their produce in the market. Now say after selling all their all say they had 100 rupees. The tax of the East India Company and Britishers was so high that some farmers could not even meet the targeted tax bracket, or let's say the tax would be up to 80 to 90 rupees, leaving the person with only 10 rupees. Now in this 10 rupees, the farmer would have to buy buffer stocks. That means seeds or food grains for their next cultivation. Also buy food grains for their own consumption and make a profit of it, which was highly impossible. Only substantially large or huge farmers could afford the rates of the British. Now, when this scenario started to occur, a lot of agriculturalists started shifting towards labor, urban labor or rural labor, because it was highly impossible for them to meet the quotas of the Britishers. That is why a lot of agricultural practices started dying out in India. I told you, to cultivate one food grain, there were various other methodologies. Now, most of them have died out. And also, a scenario occurred in India where, due to the introduction of cash crops, now as food grains are not making a profit, as food grains have not become sustainable for the agriculturist to move ahead with agriculture, most of them began moving towards cash crops. Your indigo was a popular cash crop at that time. Sugarcane and such. These were the popular cash crops at that time. Bengal, Bihar, Odisha, most of these regions adopted these cash crops. Now, when cash crops began to replace food grains, there became a food shortage, because people were no longer growing food grains, because it was not sustainable for them to pay taxes which by the amount gained by the food grains. Therefore, they started cultivating indigo and sugar cash crops, which would garner them a greater profit, and from this profit they could pay the East India officials or the British government. So the pattern of cropping changed from food grains to cash crops. Now what this led was an food shortage. The huge godowns that used to store agricultural excess were now completely depleted and filled with cash crops. What it also did was, the Indian agriculturists forgot practices of growing food grains. Since the cash crop was the new trend followed, they all learned how to grow cash crops, but they forgot how to cultivate the food grains, which was another major loss to Indian agriculture. Now, next, and finally, we sum up how trade, industries, and agriculture, there were some instances in Bengal where the East India Company also forced various agriculturists to grow cash crops, especially indigo. There were many peasant uprisings thanks to the British's policy of agriculture. Now, this is the trifecta of the colonial. So therefore, the British East India Company not only destroyed the industries and the trade of our country, they also struck a major blow to the agriculture of our country. Therefore, on the eve of independence, India had no capable cultivators for cultivating food crops. Major strains of food crops had died out. Therefore, a situation arose where India had to import food crops from America under the Ford Institution. So these are the various methodologies that the Britishers used to destroy the Indian economy. Thank you.